My name's Kate Slater and I'm a student on the MA Fine Art course at Hereford College of Arts. Before I applied for the course, I was actually working in textiles. My BA was 20 years ago, so I did have a little bit of concerns about applying for the MA. But I think the portfolio that I put together kind of represented the work up until that point. And what I was quite clear about is that the tutors were also looking for intentions for the course, so things that maybe you just started to try out that you wanted to explore further. I'd been working in the bridal industry. I'd been making lace and doing a lot of collaborations with bridal shops. So my portfolio really did consist of a lot of embroidered textiles. I was really keen to start to explore materials that were new to me, so ceramics and metal. So I did start to explore that before I put the portfolio together. But yeah, I think I was reassured quite early on that the course is quite broad and you can kind of come with lots of different skill sets. So on the course we do have quite a lot of painters, and so I think having the textile background has just brought sort of an extra level. I've also worked a lot with communities. I've worked in advocacy and advice. So one of the interests I have is to explore conveying narrative and experiences, and the MA for me is about exploring that with a focus on women's health. This has been something really personal to me, so leading up to the application I'd been on my own personal journey, and I think talking to other women it was quite clear that there was lots of stories to be told. So my MA inquiry centres on exploring mixed media to convey narratives and experiences with a focus on women's health. So this was one of the earlier pieces that I made when I started on the MA, and I think it's probably the one that's most connected to the work I was producing before. When I started the course, because I'm looking at sort of female health and experiences, I actually found writing poetry quite therapeutic. So what I started to do was embroider these poems into freehand embroidered textile pieces. And what I quite like about this is sort of leaving the trails hanging. So it's kind of this kind of continuation of the story in some way. And also by mounting it away from the backdrop, it kind of creates these lovely shadows. And for me, it was kind of about that, uncovering stories or finding stories in unexpected places. So this piece is a cyanotype, so this was completely new. So I think one thing I've sort of found on the masters is sort of trying out new techniques that you've not done before. But for me, it was very much about this imagery of the female figure depicting the three caesareans. Within my project, I've been looking a lot at language use. So it's sort of sometimes how we feel inside by certain procedures, but also the medical language that we're faced with. So this one highlights sort of different terminologies of caesarean sections. They're all my caesareans, so instead of using children's names, I actually used the way that they were delivered and actually called this piece Delivery. So this piece is exploring printmaking. So I was looking at monoprints, and within the kind of medical arena, I was looking at ultrasounds and X-rays, and then sort of like splicing that with this sense of repair. So the stitch is something that runs continuously through my work, and then again bringing in this contrast of language, this medical language. So that's been depicted by nails and wire. So something that I'm really keen to explore at the moment is this contrast between soft materials and metallic, cold materials, and again to sort of highlight that contrast between the body and medical procedures. This piece is called Regulate, and it brings together clay with wire and textiles like many of my other pieces. Here I'm sort of looking at the medical use of medicines and pills and this idea of regulating hormones. The textiles within, it kind of represents that scarring. So this is again something that I've been exploring with some of my more recent work. And it's sort of about deconstructing and then bringing things back together, but in a different way. So it's repairing things and almost healing things, but sometimes things don't end up looking like their original state. often with scars and things embedded. So a lot of my more recent work has been looking at vessels, and I think this is also to do with sort of the bodily composition of vessels and liquids, and again how things can be repaired or healed. And so here I'm working with paper porcelain, and I find that really interesting to work with because it's so delicate, but when it fires it becomes very tough. So I think it's really quite a nice reflection of sort of the female body in that sense. And also what's quite lovely is when things are put into the kiln, they often come out slightly differently. So for me, that sense of repairing, or when bodies change, when they go through different phases, it's also reflected in the materials as well. So these vessels have been sort of punched and pierced and layered with lots of different textures. There's openings where things have clearly sort of broke free, and then some of the areas of them being stitched back together to try and resemble an original vessel, but again, not quite in its original state. Wire is something I've been using quite regularly, and natural sort of more stitching, so piercing and embroidering into with key messages and phrases as well. I've started to work in sketchbooks in a very similar way, so sort of deconstructing the pages and then working back in with paper pulp is a new material I've been exploring, but this idea of sort of adding seams, adding scars to each page, exposing certain areas and then trying to repair them again. Text is sort of seeping its way through again with sort of key messages, and this idea of sort of maybe interacting with and sort of each page informing the next, and this one is something I'm developing at the moment. So this medicalised language, so when we get ultrasounds and we see this language that doesn't really often make a lot of sense to us, so this is now being stamped within metal, so metal represents the medical procedures, and then we've got this kind of like key messaging that we're not listened to, or the way we experience that health journey. The depiction of female faces, so this is something I'm looking to develop further, is how maybe print can also be incorporated with this idea of bringing together contrasting materials, metal, textiles and clay. I think for me, the Masters has really been about being on that personal journey, and it doesn't really necessarily matter where you come from, it's kind of where you want to become, and I think it's kind of working through maybe new approaches, and actually being in a cohort of really creative individuals is really inspiring. And the college itself offers lots of external opportunities. We've just recently done an exhibition in Hereford, but I think it's really important just to sort of come and have a look, and sort of get to know the different approaches. There's no right or wrong way, and I think for me, having been out of education for 20 years, it's been really reassuring to think actually we can all come from different backgrounds, but we're all on our own journey. So it's kind of just finding a way where we can explore our intentions and hopefully come to something at the end, and that we're pleased with. So good luck.
Yeah.